Are you ready to get started?
Sounds good.
Perfect. All right, everyone. By my time, it says 6 o'clock, so we'll get started right on time. Thank you so much for joining us for HMSC's monthly virtual Science on Tap. I hope you are someplace comfortable with possibly some good food and drink in hand as you join us tonight. My name is Cinnamon Moffett, and I'm the Research Program Manager at Oregon State University's Hatfield Marine Science Center in Newport, Oregon, and I will be your host for this evening. A couple of really quick logistics before we get started. You might have noticed that this is a webinar format, which means that your mics, camera, and screen shares have been disabled. But we do hope that you communicate with us often throughout tonight's talk using the chat box, which you can find either at the bottom or the top of your screen, depending on your platform. If you click on the little pop-up or the pop-out box that says chat, you'll get a little pop-out box where you can type questions into us and we can read them to our presenters tonight at any time. So feel free to do that. We'd love to have you interact with us as much as possible in this virtual format. I also wanted to let you know that we are recording tonight's event, and so we will be posting that on the HMSC's past seminar page, and I just put that link in the chat box, so if you're curious on how to see chat or find it, you can practice right now, and you can see where that link is. It'll take me a few days to get it up, but there it will be where you can share it with anybody who missed it, or if you want to see something again, you're welcome to watch it, so check that out. Couple of quick announcements. I wanted to let everybody know that we do these Science on Taps once a month. The date varies a little bit depending on our presenter. So our next virtual Science on Tap will be April 20th at 6 p.m. just like this. And we have Vera Trainer from NOAA who's going to be talking to us about her current domoic acid work with the Oregon Dungeness crab fishery. And so I'm really pleased to have her join us. If you would like to join us for that event or any of our Hatfield events, if you just Google or use whatever platform you use to type in HMSC and you scroll to the bottom of our homepage, there is a calendar of events there and you'll get all the login information you need and the schedule of events that are coming up. So you'd be welcome to do that and join us for any other event that you might want to join us for. But for tonight, we are joined by Jack Barth, who will be sharing the story of the Western Flyer with us. Before we get started, just a little bit of background on Jack. Jack Barth is the Executive Director of Oregon State University's Marine Studies Initiative. He is also a professor of oceanography in OSU's College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. Jack received his PhD in oceanography from Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Woods Hole Oceanographic Joint Program in Oceanography. Not an easy thing to say, Jack. His research seeks to understand how coastal ocean physical processes shape the influence coastal marine ecosystems. His research team uses autonomous underwater gliders, robots beneath the sea's surface, and he's described some of that work with us in past Science on Taps when we were still at the Rogue. We're very excited to have Jack here. And so Jack, I'm going to hand the floor to you and let you and Emily take it away.
Great. Thank you, Cinnamon. Can you hear me okay? All right. Thanks for everyone for joining us. Tonight, I'm going to do something a little bit different than my usual science talks. I'm going to tell you about this story of the Western Flyer. I hope it is as interesting to you as it is to me. Before we get started, I wanted to do a land acknowledgement, so let me do that, please. Oregon State University is located within the traditional homelands of the Epinefu Band of Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, Kalapuya people were forcibly removed to the reservations in Western Oregon. Today, Kalapuya are active members of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. So today I'd like to share this story with you, and I'm certain to not get all the details right, but this is sort of from my personal perspective. And if you're interested in finding out more, there's lots of people that we can put you in touch with. I'll tell a little bit about the flyer, how I got involved. And importantly, I want to introduce Emily Gottlieb, who is going to talk about some opportunities down the road here a little bit with the flyer for education. So you're probably right off the bat, you're wondering why I, as a physical oceanographer, is giving this talk. Well, as a teaser, I'm going to tell you about halfway through about how I got interested. But I'll be honest, is many of us, I think, as scientists are also, we have other things we do. We like arts, humanities, reading. And I just want to say that I grew up in a family with a scientist father, but my mother always taught us the value of reading a good book. And I want to give a shout out to her as she approaches her 90th birthday. This is sort of dedicated to her too. So on the title page here, we see 3 versions of the flyer when it was launched in 1937. And then up on the blocks in the dock when it was pulled out of the ocean where it was sunk. And then a very recent photo of it being restored. So normally I'd like to be sharing with you this talk in this amazing auditorium that we built in the new Gladys Valley Marine Studies building. We're going to get there. Things are looking better and better, and look forward to greeting you all again soon. We're very proud of this building and hope to see you there. I should say the Zoom format does allow more folks to attend, so quick hi to my mom that might be out there, and also Jane, my wife's folks, are out there. Okay, we're going to try something different here. We're going to do some polling questions, and Cinnamon's going to help me out. This will be your chance to participate. So Cinnamon, would you walk us through this?
Sure. So I'm going to put up a poll, and you'll be able to interact with that poll and answer the questions that we have. I wanted to warn folks, though, that some platforms do not allow you to interact with the polls that we're putting up. So if you're having any trouble interacting with the polls, please just put your answer in the chat if you'd like to participate. So I'm going to throw up the first poll. I hope. All right, so is everybody, Jack, are you seeing that poll?
I am. I see it on there. See some answers coming in. Keep those answers coming. So we've got 40 of you answered so far. That's great.
All right, about another second or two, we'll end the poll.
Yeah, that looks great. So,
all right, Jack, you should be able to see the results.
So hopefully everybody can see the results. So the answer, of course, is sardines, which many of you chose there. So thanks for doing that. So yeah, this is a story about Western flyer and sardine fishery, of course. Okay, so I'm also going to, along the way here, introduce you to the Western Flyer Foundation, the group that's taken on this lofty goal of restoring the Western flyer to its grandeur and using it to do some education and outreach. So here's the mission statement. And by the way, I love that graphic on the right-hand side there with the confluence of the arts and sciences in the shape of the Western flyer hull. So the mission to stir curiosity by connecting art and science in the spirit of John Steinbeck, Ed Ricketts, and their journey on the Western flyer. And I was struck by the fact that it's kind of related to what we're doing in the Marine Studies Initiative. Our mission's to create a healthy future for our oceans and the planet through transdisciplinary research and teaching. And we've just launched a new undergraduate degree that explores that relationship between people and the marine environment. So I think it's a really nice connection with the Western Flyer Foundation as well. And over on the right-hand side, you can see 3 recent pieces of art created by our students in our OSU Marine Club, which is called Ocean 11. And that's sort of a play on the movie, but the 11 is because we have 11 colleges. My college, Earth, Ocean, Atmospheric Sciences, but engineering, business, vet med, pharmacy, just every student from many colleges are interested in the marine environment. So let's get to the main three players here. That's John Steinbeck on the left, and then Ed Ricketts, the marine biologist, on the right. And of course, in between them, another great photograph of the Western Flyer. And from their adventure on board the Flyer, which I'll tell you more about, they produced this book called The Sea of Cortez, a leisurely journal of travel and research. It was published in 1941. Of course, their trip was in 1940. And it consisted of almost 600 pages in two parts. It had the narrative, the log, the 270-page log, and then a complete catalog of things they had found on the journey. And you can imagine that day, 1941, when that was published, tough times during World War II, didn't have a very large publication or exposure. But of course, a little bit later, Steinbeck extracted the log and gave us this one, the 1951 version called The Log from the Sea of Cortez. And he added a very nice about Ed Ricketts as the preface. And that was to honor his friend, Ed Ricketts, who had unfortunately passed away in 1948 from an unfortunate train colliding with his car in Monterey Bay. So that's the book. And here's the next polling question. That looks great, Cinnamon. Yeah, so well over half of you have had the pleasure of reading the book. I highly recommend it. I hope I piqued your interest in reading it as we go along here. Well, Ed Ricketts was also an author, and I think many of you probably know that. Here he is again on the upper left. He produced, with Jack Galvin, a book called Between Pacific Tides, shown in the middle there, in 1939. So it predated their voyage on the Western Flyer. And it was a compendium of all the creatures that could be found basically between Pacific tides, between the high and low tides, and what we call the intertidal zone. Hugely popular, and has gone through time as something that all marine biologists have consulted. You can see the third edition there on the left. And interestingly enough, Joel Hedgepeth became the editor, and he, in fact, was one of the directors of the Yaquina Biological Lab at the Hatfield Marine Science Center in the 60s and early 70s. So a connection to Oregon there. And then finally, just a picture of the 5th edition. And I think I read on the Stanford University Press that this is their most best-selling volume in their catalog. So another polling question: how about your familiarity with this book? Super. So now we're testing the nerd marine biologists out there. Okay, great. So almost half of you have looked at Ed Ricketts' volume. So that's pretty cool. Okay, Western Flyer launched in 1937 in Tacoma, Washington. It was made out of the wonderful old growth fir that was available in the area. So it takes us to another polling question. This one you're going to have to, it's not just a yes or no. So how long do you think the Western Flyer is? right. Yeah, that's looking good. You guys are right on the mark. There's about a little bit of a majority in that 60 to 79 feet, and then a bunch more in that 40 to 59. So it's not a very small vessel, and it's not a very big vessel. Let's actually check out what it is. So in the log, John Steinbeck says it's 76 feet long and it has a 25-foot beam. That's the distance across the vessel. And it had a 165 horsepower diesel engine and could go about 10 knots. Well, another person I'm going to introduce to you a little bit later, Chris Chase, who's the project manager in the early shipwright working on the flyer, told me, well, Jack, that he didn't get it quite right. It's 77 feet long and it has a 20-foot beam, which is, that's a fair bit less. And that's going to affect, if you've been on a vessel, how much you roll really. And the volume, of course, of the vessel. And a speed of about 9 to 9.5 knots. So just for fun, I threw up one of our OSU vessels. This is the RV Pack Storms. You can probably visualize it. It's 84 feet long, has a 24-foot beam, has a 520 horsepower Caterpillar, and goes the same speed. So that gives you an idea about how big the flyer is. So I mentioned the Pacific Sardine Fishery in Monterey, California. It participated through the 40s. And over on the right-hand side, I have a plot of the sardine landings on the US West Coast. Over time, it starts in 1910, goes by decades up to the 70s. And you can see the heyday there in the 30s and 40s of the cannery row and the sardine fishery. But it did eventually collapse. And as that happened, the Western Flyer became part of the fisheries a little further north in the California Current up off Washington, southeast Alaska. And then it fell into disrepair and, difficult to maintain wooden boats. It was neglected and actually sank twice in 2013. So a little bit about the trip. It was 6 weeks long down to the Sea of Cortez, or what we call the Gulf of California. March of April of 1940. So during World War II, they set off on this adventure. Ricketts had just published that, we've seen Between Pacific Tides, and Steinbeck had just published The Grapes of Wrath. So I think as Steinbeck got some pushback from some of the themes in The Grapes of Wrath, I think he was probably looking forward to this adventure. So their goal was to collect specimens from the rock and tide pools and the shoreline and get a macro level description of the ecosystem in the Gulf. Tons of collecting. They did 24 discrete collections from 21 localities, thousands of specimens, 560 species, including some that were undescribed. And on the map there, which I took off the Wikipedia site, you can see their path down from Monterey, down past the tip of Baja, Cabo San Lucas, wound their way up into La Paz, where they had a bit of fun in the city, and visited the Isla Espiritu Santo, which I'll get back to in a second, and then up to Laredo, across the Gulf towards Guaymas, and then back down. So quite a great trip. As an oceanographer, I couldn't resist putting up one piece of data. Here's a satellite image of the sea surface chlorophyll. And it was collected in November of 97 from a NASA satellite. So the bright green, yellow, red colors, that's plankton in the water column. And this is what's feeding and fueling those intertidal organisms, and then on up through the food chain to the shrimp and fish and everything else, the marine mammals, et cetera, the really amazing diversity in the Sea of Cortez. So, polling question, have you spent time looking around a tide pool? Wow, this is great to see. So we have about 50 of you responding so far, and it's mostly yeses. That's terrific. This is a picture from a class I led a couple summers ago at Hatfield. So it is a Oregon tide pool, not a Baja tide pool. Okay, so here's a photograph that's fun to look at. This is from the Journey. And Tony Berry was the captain. We had the engineer Tex Travis, Sparky Nia, one of the able seamen, and Tiny Coletto, the other one. And Carol Steinbeck went along as well. So John Steinbeck, Ed Ricketts, and then folks listed here. And this is a photograph that shows Ed Ricketts, the far right, and then John and Carol Steinbeck next to him. And so you can imagine getting ready for this journey, loading up with all the sampling jars and the food and all that stuff. And, you know, normally we'd be at the Rogue Brewery, but I decided that I should have one of these nearby. So this is a Carta Blanca. I think this is probably what they might have been drinking. And I still have the top on, but I'm going to have that after this. So I think this is my last one. How many of you have had the chance to visit the Sea of Cortez and Gulf of California? Just maybe perhaps just on its shore, not on its seas. Amazing place. That's great. Wow. It's okay. So it looks like 60% of you have had a chance to go down. So super. So you'll get a sense of what this place is like. It's just a photograph that shows the sort of the arid climate next to this amazing seashore and inland sea. So in oceanography, we're lucky to go to some of these great places. So this is a Pisces symposium that I had the chance to go. About talking about transitional areas in the Pacific, places where there are fronts or changes in the ocean, where there's lots of organisms. And we compared those across the whole North Pacific, and we got to meet in La Paz. So these are photographs I took along the way. The far left, the frigate birds, the intertidal and swimming in the bays, going out on a small boat to the bays. And then this one from the second to the right with the Pebble Beach here, that's my son, Alex. He came along, as did Jane, my wife. But you see these scallops in the cobbles here. They're very rhythmic. And those are these beautiful edge waves where the incoming swell reflects in a bay and forms these repeating patterns. Maybe you've seen them. This is something we teach in physical oceanography. And they make ripples in the sand, but I've really never seen them move the cobbles around. The cobbles are almost the size of my hand. So a pretty energetic area. And of course, you got to have a sunset shot. Oops, excuse me. So in the book, and I'm not going to quote extensively from it, but if you get into it, you're going to find that you read a page and there's something that is just beautiful. So here's one I liked. It's not enough to say that we cannot know or judge because all the information is in. The process of gathering knowledge does not lead to knowing. A child's world spreads out only a little beyond his understanding, while that of a great scientist thrusts outward immeasurably. And then this next phrase, I think, Steinbeck and Ricketts were in touch with us research scientists. An answer is invariably the parent of a great family of new questions. That sounds like he's getting ready to write a proposal. And then this is my oceanography 332 class out on Quina Bay, enjoying learning about the ocean and the estuary. All right, so let's continue the story. The sardine fishery failed, and the Western Flyer went up north and was part of the fishery up there. In fact, I noted that in 1963 to 64, it was part of did a survey for the International Pacific Halibut Commission. And we've actually been using the Halibut Commission data lately for looking at oxygens near the seafloor. So kind of a neat connection. So another quote about boats: "And a boat, above all other inanimate things, is personified in man's mind. This is not mysticism, but identification. Man, building this greatest and most personal of all tools, has in turn received a boat-shaped mind, and the boat a man-shaped soul. His spirit and the tendrils of his feelings are so deep in a boat that the identification is complete." What a poetic way to that connection between us and the sea and the boats we go out on. Here's another old photograph of the flyer, and I think that might be Chris Chase looking at some diagrams of restoring the vessel. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. That's kind of like how a bunch of us have had the real pleasure to design this newest research vessel that's going to be used at OSU in the next couple of years. It's a 200-footer that'll be able to stay out for weeks and study the ocean. It has the name, the RV Ta'ani, which is a Siletz word. You remember I gave the land acknowledgement. This is from the Siletz language, Ta'ani. It means offshore. So 2 kinds of boats, 2 great adventures. A little bit later in the 60s, the Western Flyer was renamed the Gemini. You can see a photo there. And then this is describing its demise, that in January 2010, the Gemini was moored up in Swinomish Slough near Anacortes. It sunk. And as Kevin Bailey describes in his very nice book, if you'd like to read a follow-on about how the flyer went on to participate in the fisheries of the California current, please read Kevin's book. It's terrific. I like that line, the rusted and dilapidated boat was in fact the most famous fishing vessel ever to have sailed the original Western Flyer. And I'll just mention that Carmel Finley is also a historian looking at some of these issues. She has a great page called the Pacific Fishery History Project, which you can find there. So these are some photos that Chris and others sent me that show the vessel sunk at the dock. It's really a shame. Beautiful vessel. You can see it finally pulled up there on the dry dock. And I want you to notice the little bit of coloring, right? We've only seen black and white photos so far. Here's some of the true colors of the flyer. Just remember this little green stripe here along the side. So this is where I introduced the Western Flyer Foundation. And as I mentioned, they're taking on this task to restore the flyer and use it to stir people's curiosity and to really use it as a way to educate the next generation about the ocean and the coasts. So please take a look at their site. I'm going to introduce a few folks from there. This is John Gregg. He's the founder and director of the Western Flyer Foundation. He has a background in geotechnical engineering, formed a company of his own, has been quite successful working in the ocean and developing new ways for surveying the seafloor. Very inventive, in fact, holds some patents for how to do these drillings in a more ecologically friendly way. And his hope is really to, as I described, restore the Western Flyer and bring it back to folks to do educational activities. So John bought the vessel from the gentleman that had the last possession when it was sunk, and is putting out his energy into restoring it. And then there's this guy, Tom Keffer, who's the board president for the Western Flyer Foundation. And this is where I'm going to tie it together, how I got involved. So Tom was an oceanographer, a CEO of a public software company. And he actually is a beaver, got his PhD in 1980. And just for fun, I looked up the title of his thesis. So Tom, if you're on, there it is. Mean and time-dependent temperature and vorticity balances in the subtropical North Atlantic. So he was a postdoc at Woods Hole. You heard Cinnamon use that mouthful. And this is where Tom and I met each other. So there's a youngish looking Jack at Woods Hole in the early 80s. Tom and I met each other there. And then he went on to be faculty at UW. I came to OSU. He founded a very successful software company and then went on to do some nice work in nonprofits and helping with venture capital. But I think what he really likes to do is sail that J42 sailboat that you see down there. So Tom, was active with John in restoring the flyer, and he called me up, I guess it was 3 or 4 years ago now, and said, "Hey, Jack, do you know anybody that knows anything about in Oregon about connecting the ocean and the coast to education and might be interested in this kind of thing?" And I said, "Tom, you came to the right place. It's exactly what I'm doing, and it's my passion." So he invited me to get involved, advising some of the team as we move forward with this. So that's one of those things that I'll quote at the end where Steinbeck says, "Everything's connected." This is one of those connections. Chris Chase is the project director. He's started off as the original shipwright, the owner of the Port Townsend shipwrights, which I'll show you in just a minute. And then he's transitioned just in the latest years to being the overall project director. Amazing guy, and I'm going to point you towards his really nice videos of the restoration. Okay, so let's get into it. This is the restoration. Please do go see Chris Chase's videos. Make sure you have a bunch of hours or days ready to go because you're going to watch those over and over again. They're terrific. There's a super nice article in the Wooden Boat magazine written by Jonathan White. You can get a copy of that. I'm happy to share my copy. So here's the vessel pulled into the Port Townsend shipwrights up in Puget Sound. And I got a chance to go there in May of 2019. So I'm just going to show you a bunch of my photos. So I can drive there from Corvallis, and you get up there and ships everywhere. And you come up to this closed metal building, and oh my gosh, there it is. There's that most famous sailing vessel of all time tucked in there amongst the trucks. And in that view in the lower left, there's a America's Cup yacht being worked on out there. Truly a fun place. So got to meet with Chris and Tom Keffer and Lee Christie up there. So you go inside, you can see the Port Townsend shipwright sign there. And I've just shown you where the hull of the flyer is there on the right-hand side, propped up, being rebuilt, and on the left-hand side, the deck house. And I've just noticed that Chris says that about, you can't, a lot of that wood was rotten, but they wanted to save as much as possible. And only about 10% of the hull is retained and 60% of the deck house. So here's looking at the bow, and the original keel, it was maintained. It's the original Douglas fir, but the new stem was put on out of a hardwood called Purple Heart. You can see the picture there with me standing next to it. And if we zoom in just a little bit on the upper part, you can see the decay and the barnacles and the degradation. So really a tough job to restore, but one that's being done really well. So that's Chris Chase in the middle there, explaining to us how the stern was rebuilt out of this Purple Heart wood. You can see on the left image, basically that whole stern section. And then looking forward, you can see the interior frame parts being replaced with Doug fir. Walking up a little bit and looking down into the hull, you can see how the ribs coming out from the keel, the original darker wood, and then some of the newer wood going in over the top with a couple of the shipwrights there working away. So you can see some of the deck and parts connected to the deck house in the upper left. And some of the nails that were pulled out being replaced with much more robust bronze hardware. And I thought it was very nice that Chris and John actually gave each of us a piece of the Western flyer. So this is one of the ribs. You can see the original nail on there. So, I mean, it's to hold a piece of history like that is something really wonderful. So let's go back to the stern now and look forward. And I challenge any of you to say that this is not as beautiful as any cathedral you've ever seen. These are the beautiful lines looking forward from the stern with the Purple Heart stern post. You can see the older original ribs and then the oak ribs that have been carefully chosen and shaped, steamed and shaped and bent to fit. Truly a really amazing craftsmanship. So back, let's take a look again at the deck house. Here it is. Now this is the place where Steinbeck and Ricketts and the crew lived. This is where they cooked. This is where they slept. So you get to walk around it. Here's us peering down into it. Here are a look at the portals, and you notice the older wood up around the portals, but being matched up with the new wood that's been shaped around this circular deck house. Really amazing to fit those two together. So I like this one because I'm an avid bicyclist. This kind of shows you the scale. You're a shipwright, you can ride your bike in and work on this cool project. So let's peek in this porthole that doesn't look too good. There's the bunks. I mean, right there, that's where these guys slept as they went on this amazing journey. So it's really, really fun to poke around. So let's keep going through the restoration. We're doing pretty well here. The interior, this would have been a fish hold, right? So this is being restored to be the places where the scientific operations can happen. So there'll be a dry lab down here where there's various instruments that I'll tell you about. Alaskan yellow cedars being used on that inner hull deck. And a couple of those photos I took off of a fun article on Filson's site. That's the beauty of the Western Flyer. It appeals to lots of people, and there's some nice articles out there. So you can see the new wood going in, getting ready to put on what's called the planking on the outside. So now I'm going past a time when I could take any pictures. These are provided by Chris Chase. And in fact, I took stills out of some of the wonderful videos that Chris has put up. So this is episode 16. And this is the beginning of putting on the planking. So here are the ribs coming up top, the keel down here, the stem up front. And what was chosen was a wood called sipo, which is a mahogany grown in a sustainable way in Africa. And the video shows these big planks being cut down to these 2-inch thick sizes and then wonderfully attached, carefully attached to the flyer. And then, of course, you got to cover up all that beautiful mahogany with a paint that preserves that wood. So here's from late 2020. Remember, we're in COVID times now, so there's a reduced crew up at the Port Townsend shipwrights, but they're getting work done. And lo and behold, there's that beautiful green stripe that I mentioned before. So the flyer getting back its wonderful new wood and new finish. And then just a view from the stern. Remember, I showed you the Purple Heart through the stern post and up along the ribs here. Now all beautifully restored. And again, I took this from episode 26 and a half. Chris is done. It's about 5 minutes long, but I watched it so many times, I think an hour went by. All right, well, let's transition a little bit and talk about the science and education mission. And I'm going to give a shout out to William Gilly from Stanford, who's been leading a lot of this effort. Some of us have been advising him. And on the right-hand side, that's a conductivity temperature depth profiler. The conductivity tells us the salinity of the water. And from the salinity and temperature and depth, we can tell how heavy the water is. And, the ocean's layered and the wind upsets that. It lifts some layers up, some back down. And with this tool, we can probe into the ocean and see where all these underwater currents are happening and find things like fronts where on a cold side there might be cold nutrients, might have a big fish population, and then the warm, less nutrient rich oceanic water where there might not be any large fish. Another thing we do is use this thing called an acoustic Doppler current profiler to send pings down into the ocean. They bounce back and we can infer the horizontal currents throughout the water column. Really fun technology. So we're going to try to put one of those over the side. We'll measure the winds, the wind direction, the temperature. And then this SIMRAD scientific echo sounder, that sends a pulse of sound out and bounces off a fish. So you can get a subsurface picture of the things, the fish that might be out there. The idea is to get a couple ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, that can be used from the flyer, and then an even more sophisticated system that would image plankton and sample plankton. So this is, we're on our way. Gilly's been successful with some grant work. This will be carried on over the next year or two. And those of us at OSU know that the RV Oceanus is going to be retired soon, because I showed you the new RV Ta'ani. And Oceanus is loaded with science sensors. And so I have a little scheme in my mind, which I started talking to people about. Wouldn't it be very cool if we use some of the flow through system sensors from the Oceanus and pass them along to the Western Flyer? See if we can make that happen. All right, timeline. This project's been going on a fair time and a lot of work. COVID slowed things down a little bit, but it looks like things are really coming together, and there's the chance that the Western Flyer would sail south from Puget Sound, where Port Townsend is, as early as late summer 21. And I'm lobbying for a potential stop in Newport. I think the Flyer Foundation would be up for that. And remember, we have that great new building, and we're thinking about, with COVID restrictions opening up, maybe doing a grand opening for that. And so wouldn't that be so cool if we had the new building, a stop by the Western Flyer to celebrate this great connection between history and the arts and science and the science of the sea. The boat will then go to Monterey in late 21, March 22, be outfitted, and it'll do its, hopefully its original Sea of Cortez trip in 22, and then come back to Monterey in the winter months in between. And then it's going to alternate the Northern California and Oregon coast and Baja in the other year. So we'll see her back hopefully in 23 and then 25 again, et cetera. That's the overall plan. So now I'd like to introduce Emily Gottlieb. Emily's the education director, and she's a new hire at the foundation. You can see that she is an ecologist. She's an educator. She grew up in Connecticut on that other ocean on the other side of the U.S., but we welcome her here. She's been an environmental educator working with citizen science programs, and it looks like a really fun intertidal ecology and community science project in Argentina on a Fulbright. So we really welcome Emily. And by the way, the gentleman down here, that's Gilly, talking to a bunch of students in a flyer event. So I'm going to hand this off and introduce you to Emily with the hope that you will learn more about her and reach out to her. So go ahead, Emily.
Thank you so much, Jack, and thanks for inviting me to this event. Thanks to the event organizers as well. So hello, everyone. I'm Emily Gottlieb, Education Director with the Western Flyer Foundation. I'm so happy to be here with you virtually this evening. So I'll be speaking a little bit about the dream and the plan for the education and research programs on board the Western Flyer. So just to go back to our mission, the mission of the Western Flyer Foundation is to stir curiosity by connecting art and science in the spirit of John Steinbeck, Ed Ricketts, and their journey on the Western Flyer, So you get to see that fun Venn diagram again, the intersection of arts and sciences with the Western Flyer vessel in the middle. So we've got three sort of strategies that we're looking at to get to that mission. So we're going to be employing citizen science programs, arts and humanities approaches, all kind of tied into project-based learning. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term citizen science, citizen science really are science projects that engage lay people. Those can be students, volunteers, other non-scientists in real research efforts. And those are often done in collaboration with professional scientists. So Jack already mentioned some of the equipment that we'll have on board to aid those citizen science projects. So again, we'll have a CTD, a meteorological array, we'll have an ROV, an acoustic Doppler current profiler, an echo sounder, a pH sensor, among other really fun science toys on board. But the Western Flyer is really going to be so much more than just a research platform. We're also really focusing on engaging arts and humanities approaches in our education programs and research projects. So for example, we already have a science illustration mentorship program, which we piloted this school year. And in this program, professional science illustrators visit K through 12 classes. They teach them techniques for creating detailed, scientifically accurate art. And we'll be expanding this program in the coming years to include creative nonfiction writing. And we'll be inviting artists and writers on board to guide participants or students in using arts and humanities approaches, and also to gain inspiration for their work. And then sort of the third pillar here is project-based learning. So project-based learning is a model where participants, they can be students, researchers, they work on a project over an extended period of time, and they're going to be working on solving real-world problems. So participants will come out on the boat for a series of data collection experiences. If they're students, those experiences will be supplemented by curriculum materials so they can learn about what they're doing back in the classroom. The research questions and the art and humanities projects that happen on board the Western Flyer will be driven by the interest and the curiosity of the students who come on board and the communities that they live in. So our main target participants for these education programs are going to be high school and community college students. So the boat will serve as a marine science research and education platform for groups that don't necessarily already have access to one. But for these onboard projects, we're going to be encouraging partnerships between universities and other research centers with local high schools and community colleges and other community members. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here's just to kind of go back to that timeline. So how can folks from OSU and other members of your community get involved? So you can see here that this is sort of a rough timeline, but the boat will be in Monterey for about 8 months out of the year on any given year. So August through March-ish. And then it'll be traveling north as far as Southeast Alaska or south as far as the Sea of Cortez in alternating years for about 4 months at a time. So in advance of those travels to north or south ports of call, we'll be putting out requests for proposals for projects, research and art projects to happen on board. So now what we're looking at is those RFPs will come out in August for projects that would take place in the following spring or summer. So when we're looking at projects, we'll be looking at projects that involve citizen science, art and humanities approaches, project-based learning, and again, looking for collaborations between universities, research centers, high schools, community colleges, artists, other community partners. So just as an example, if, say in the central coast of Oregon, a group identified that microplastics in the ocean were a major concern. A lab or a class from OSU could partner with a local high school or a community college and a few artists and put together a proposal. And they could say, we're going to design a research project to take place on the Western Flyer, where we'll be collecting water samples from the boat, sending those samples back to a lab for analysis. Maybe we'll also monitor transport via currents along using drifters or other technology. And then in the months leading up to the boat's arrival in Oregon, participants might collect ocean water samples from the shore or from rivers that flow into the ocean. And then participating artists can collaborate to create a public art piece using plastic debris, or a campaign or science communication piece to raise awareness about microplastics and to share data. So just to give you an idea of the type of collaborative interdisciplinary project that will be happening on the boat. Next slide, please. So in the meantime, while you're waiting for the request for proposals to come out or for the boat to come to your community, I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. You can find that on our website, which is westernflyer.org. Please follow us on social media. Don't forget to check out Chris's YouTube videos that were mentioned. They are fantastic, and you'll find yourself binge watching them. And email us. We'd love to hear from you if you have questions or comments or stories connected to the boat. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jack.
Thanks, Emily. So this is my my last slide here, and I'll just do one of the quotes from the book, which is, arguably the most famous one. All things are one thing, and that one thing is all things. Plankton, a shimmering phosphorescence on the sea, and the spinning planets in an expanding universe, all bound together by the elastic string of time. It is advisable to look from the tide pool to the stars and then back to the tide pool again. So thanks for your attention. There's my email, Emily's email, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much to both of you. If anybody has questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'm going to start kind of going through them. We have a few minutes, so feel free to ask away. Jack, I'm not sure you'll be able to answer, but I also see Tom is on the chat. So if you need assistance, you can call out. But do you know what type of engine size, etc., will be in the new Western Flyer?
Yeah, and Cinnamon, should I stop sharing and just have the faces up?
Yeah, that would be great. If you're comfortable with that, that would be great.
How's that? We're a little bit bigger. Yeah, I wondered when I wrote that slide about the size of the engines, I was thinking, how is 165 horsepower is going to drive it at 9 knots when 500 is in the pack storm? Chris bailed me out, as did Kaya Johnson. So Chris Chase said that they're aiming for a very similar diesel to what is in the pack storm, about 500 horsepower.
And do you know if it'll be new, or are they going to try to do some kind of restoration to the original?
Certainly not. I don't know exactly about the purchase.
And then Emily, some questions for you. Will there be a collaboration with Mexican educational institutions in your vision?
Yes, absolutely. So we're already starting to reach out to partners in Baja to create collaborations down there. And we'll likely even have an education coordinator in Mexico.
And that was another question that kind of came up. Will there be support for the RFP for those groups that are trying to figure out how to create these collaborations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really what I'm here for, and when we have our science director hired, what they'll be there for, to sort of support those proposals.
And if somebody's looking for that, they reach out to you directly then?
Yes, yeah, and this is way in the future. It won't be this August, or it'll be in the future, but we'll be, the best way to find out about it actually would be to sign up on our newsletter now, or reach out to me directly.
Perfect, thank you. And then do you know who's the first trip on the Sea of Cortez?
I don't know who the guest list is yet, but
that's going to be a tough ticket to get, right, Emily?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people want to be on that first trip down.
And then we have a couple of questions about, do we know if there's any descendants for Ricketts that they might be involved or in some way?
I believe that, I think this is right. I think a granddaughter of his lives up in Southeast Alaska. And I don't know what her involvement is or what her knowledge is of the project thus far.
And then another question kind of along those lines, and this goes back a little bit, and again, I'm not sure who's the best person, but do we know about how these two characters found their way together to do this work? Jack, do you know how Ricketts and Steinbeck came to be a partnership to go to?
I thought you were talking about the modern characters, John Rick.
We could talk about that too, but I think
I believe that there's a nice story about that on the Western Flyer Foundation's webpage, and I believe they were at the dentist together, and one of them walked out with an extracted tooth that looked like crap, and they struck up a conversation, and they said, I'd heard about you. I'd like to meet you more.
Nice.
The story I've heard too.
We have another question about the engine, and do we know if the new engine will burn biodiesel?
I'm going to pass that one to Tom if he's in the audience. I don't know.
All right, Tom, if you can, go ahead and answer that question for Matt. That would be great. We also have a question about, you talked a little bit about doing different kinds of studies, but will you also be conducting any marine and oceanographic biological studies?
Yes, on board, absolutely. We'll be not just physical oceanography, but also biology on board.
The questions keep coming, so I'm just going to keep hitting us with them. So is there a plan to allow people to tour the boat when it's in port, like in Monterey?
Yeah, that is the hope, that post-COVID times that we'll be able to have tours on board.
All right, and Tom definitely jumped in and he said they'll be operating in remote areas, so mostly it'll be locally sourced diesel.
Thanks, Tom.
It takes a group to answer some of these great. In addition to all these questions, we're also getting lots of virtual applause, basically saying thank you both for joining us and being a part of this. We really appreciate you sharing your journey and the journey of this vessel with us all. So thank you for that. Jack, if you could, can you talk just a little bit briefly about how this book and these two individuals kind of changed the course of marine biology for us, the impact on our work and our studies?
Well, I think I mentioned Ricketts Between Pacific Tides is certainly a work that's consulted even to this day. I mean, I'll just say that as a physical oceanographer, I have a copy, cracked it open, and tried to learn about the title. I think just the switching to the prose side, just those wonderful descriptions of the organisms and if you've taken the time to walk on the shore, or you've had a chance to go out on a boat, or you've gone to Baja for a few weeks, your mind changes and you see things differently. So I think it's that outlook on marine biology and how it fits, and that connection to people is really what I think is influential.
Thank you, Jack. And as we're wrapping up, Emily, do you have any kind of final thoughts that you want to share with all of us?
This is such an exciting project. I hope that you'll all stay tuned for updates, and just really looking forward to connecting with folks who are in the audience about ideas or questions that they might have about this project.
Great. And Jack, any last comments from you?
Yeah, just thanks for joining us, and it's a wonderful story, and hopefully you'll spread the word. Definitely check out the videos. And as far as the Oregon, we do have a coastal STEM hub that's centered there at Hatfield Marine Science Center. And I think Tracy Cruz is on, as well as Ichung Chung. So I'm sure they'll be working with Emily on connecting the K through 12 rural schools up and down the Oregon coast. So looking forward to the adventure.
And as the story continues, we're happy to be involved in that. It's amazing. Again, thank you both so very much. And for those folks that are doing this work in Port Townsend, we thank you for your efforts and continuing that work through COVID times to keep everything on track. So thank you for that. For everybody online, thank you so much for joining us and being part of tonight. We hope that maybe you decide to join us again. You know how to find that information at the the Hatfield Marine Science Center website to see the events that are coming up again. And again, thank you so much for your time, and for our speakers, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night. All right, I'm going to end the presentation, everybody. Thank you so much.